Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Aviation This Week on Channels Television. I'm Bukola Joe Oketumbi. The federal government says it's enhancing surveillance at points of entry in response to the recent outbreak of Ebola in neighboring countries, especially Guinea and the Congo Democratic Republic, as it cannot afford to have two deadly diseases to battle with as the COVID-19 pandemic persists. While Nigeria fights hard to keep the virus infections low, Britain starts a mandatory quarantine for its inbound passengers. That's our sneak preview on the program. Our flight takes off to the skies.
COVID-19 has indeed transformed air travel, not only with the preventive protocols, but with the need to travel with a PCR negative test, all in a bid to ensure that air travel is not a vector of the virus.
The key challenge is making sure that people are not taken from one place to another carrying the virus. So the whole idea is to try to ensure that everybody who boards an airplane is negative. So we don't help in moving the disease from one place to another. But as far as spreading it on the airplane is concerned, I think we've kind of proved that with the wearing of the mask, with the cleaning of the aeroplanes and disinfecting of the aeroplane, and the air system in the aeroplanes makes it very, very highly unlikely that the virus can spread on board.
Traveling in the pandemic is also a no mean feat, as passengers must be as careful as possible in the face of the new variant. This new variant is also creating tensions between countries, as the United Arab Emirates has suspended flights from Nigeria from February 28 to March 10. This comes on the heels of a 24-hour ban by the federal government over the airline's introduction of a rapid antigen test as a requirement for Dubai travelers, which is against the Nigerian negative PCR requirements.
There's a bilateral agreement that allows air services between one country and the other. And for us to have full utilization of that bilateral agreement, it means that we all have to conduct ourselves within the ambience of the rule of engagement. So if we've said that, okay, Nigeria should come into UAE with visa, so any Nigerian that is going into UAE must ensure that he has the visa, correct? So if they said that, okay, in addition to that, you need to have a PCR test before coming, it becomes mandatory. Then when they realize that your people keep coming up with fake COVID tests, and it's affecting their people, affecting their country, the appropriate thing to do at that particular is to put additional measure. Now, the additional measure is an additional cost on the passengers.
While preventing the spread of COVID-19 is a shared responsibility, many are worried that there is no adequate monitoring of inbound passengers into Nigeria. From Nigeria to Britain, here passengers arriving at Heathrow Airport from February the 15th are required to quarantine in hotels in a bid to keep COVID-19 variants out of the UK. Under the scheme, travellers arriving in England from any of 33 red list countries will have to spend 10 days quarantined in a hotel room. The launch of the system, which had already been set out earlier this month, marks the government's latest effort to prevent another relapse into crisis after a second wave of a more contagious COVID-19 variant forced the country into a prolonged lockdown at the start of the year.
You just got to bear in mind that it is currently illegal to travel abroad for holidays anyway. We would expect people who are coming in from one of these red list countries to be able to cover their costs. As for mental health care provision, that is very important.
Countries on the red list include South Africa and Brazil, both of which have seen variants of the virus that could reduce the efficacy of existing vaccines. The UK government says its quarantine program is among the strictest in the world, which includes mandatory tests on the 2nd and 8th day after travellers arrive and harsh punishments for those who flout the rules, potentially facing up to 10 years in prison. While the quarantine package program allows approved hotels to accept quarantining guests, the hospitality industry is barely getting by with the new initiative. The occupancy rate is only about 2% of pre-pandemic levels at the St Giles Heathrow Hotel in London, one of the many hotels in the UK that have applied to become an official quarantine hotel in hopes of earning even a small amount of revenue from guests.
With the quarantine package that we do, we put ample of supplies in there, so there's no need for housekeeping to go in and clean the rooms during this period. So everything is there for the guests to use while they're here.
Over 400 rooms at the hotel remains empty, except for a handful of international guests staying for up to 2 weeks at most to self-isolate. Many hotels, including St Giles, which has 9 hotels across the world, have been sitting empty for months, losing money, so the scheme could be vital for cash flow.
Keeping the hotels open will enable us to keep our staff employed. We've been quite lucky here at the St Giles because we have a good team with a lot of cost control. But it's now been almost a year that this has happened, much longer than what we were anticipating.
From Britain to its several European Union neighbours, Belgium, France, Portugal and Finland have announced new travel or entry regulations. This follows discussions among EU leaders about restricting non-essential trips across the bloc's internal borders to contain the spread of the coronavirus, particularly the mutant strains emerging from the UK, South Africa and Brazil.
France has just prolonged the state of emergency for a couple of months, so there is a time limit to this. Some of the measures taken are both limited in scope and in time. Others, at the start of the pandemic, were not only with a very large scope, but also not time-bound.
To combat the virulent UK strain, the EU has already blocked all but freighter travellers on essential trips from entering the bloc from Britain. From Europe to Canada, where the Canadian government has also begun mandatory hotel quarantine for arriving passengers at the cost of $2,000. The additional measure to be paid by any returning passenger.
We will be introducing mandatory PCR testing at the airport for people returning to Canada. Travelers will then have to wait for up to 3 days at an approved hotel for their test results at their own expense, which is expected to be more than $2,000. Also, in the coming weeks, be requiring non-essential travelers to show a negative test before entry at the land border with the US.
In its continuous assessment of travel risk for Canadians, all international passenger flights arrivals have been redirected to only 4 international airports, which are Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto's Pearson and Montreal's Pierre Elliott Trudeau. From Canada to Australia, as the country received its first COVID-19 vaccination deliveries, Australia has escaped the high number of cases and deaths recorded by many other developed countries owing to border closures and lockdowns.
The Eagle has landed. I am pleased to be able to tell Australians that shortly after midday, the first shipment of Pfizer vaccines arrived in Australia.
The International Air Transport Association says it's easy for governments to shut off their countries with unilateral actions, but re-establishing global connectivity needs cooperation, and IATA is engaged with the standard-setting process with the recently introduced IATA Travel Pass.
The Secretary to the Government of the Federation and the Chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, Mr. Boss Mustafa, says Nigeria is in talks with the United Arab Emirates authorities over the flight ban on Nigeria. He was speaking at the Presidential Task Force briefing early this week.
In the last 1 year, we have experienced 2 waves of infections and recorded a lot of fatalities. At the last briefing, the PTF mentioned the dialogue between Nigeria and the United Arab Emirates, particularly the Emirates Airline, and KLM over the testing requirements prescribed by some airlines. We also informed you that outbound airlift of passengers by these airlines have been restricted pending when the protocols are ironed out. The PTF wishes to underscore the fact that respect for national protocols, setting up of appropriate infrastructure, and the all-round protection of our traveling nationals shall remain paramount in our consideration and eventual outcome. The Presidential Task Force is also enhancing surveillance at points of entry to respond to recent outbreak of Ebola in neighboring countries, especially Guinea and Congo DCR. We shall keep an eye on it to avoid having to combat with two deadly diseases at the same time. This is not a task for government alone, but for all Nigerians, and indeed all members of the public have a role to play.
Human beings are not the only ones reeling from the negative impact of the pandemic. Animals too are bearing the brunt. Here's a report on the London Zoo.
At this time of year, which is the half-term holidays, London Zoo should be teeming with children. But as the zoo in Regent's Park, central London, nurses a multi-million-pound hole in its budget and lockdown keeps visitors away, even during school holidays. Opened in 1828 by the Zoological Society of London, London Zoo is the world's oldest scientific zoo. It was visited by Charles Darwin while he was writing his Origin of Species, and Queen Elizabeth II is its patron. Together with Whipsnade Zoo in Bedfordshire, which is also owned by the ZSL, it has 22,949 animals. A coati is here undergoing checks as the zookeepers are anxious.
This is Velma, an 8-year-old coati, and we're just doing a regular health check on her. She's upper middle-aged, so we want to catch any potential health conditions early. So we're just doing a full workup. We'll do blood work, a physical exam, and x-rays to just make sure she's overall healthy. We believe very much that catching a disease early helps us treat it, and we can really prolong the life and health and welfare of our animals by catching problems early. And these guys are prone to arthritis, especially in their spine as they get older. So if she's starting to have any arthritis, we want to catch that early so we can give her pain medication so she's not in any discomfort.
Red hogs are about to be fed and the animals are on a diet.
These guys get quite a specific diet, which is sorted by our nutritionist, the zoo nutritionist, and it's very much, there's a set amount they need every week, and that needs to come every day, just to keep them healthy, really. So they get a wide range of fruit and veg, and well, you can see nuts and pulses and fish we give them.
For Kate Sanders, who is the big cat team leader at the zoo, she is concerned the zoo might not survive.
I'm concerned that the zoo might not survive. You know, like, we are losing so much money. So just feed these animals, it costs nearly £1 million a month. And without any visitors coming in, we're not getting any revenue, or very little. You know, some people are being very generous and we're getting lots of donations and things like that, but it's not the same as having actual visitors here to support the zoo. And I'm worried.
Feeding animals in this zoo costs around £1 million a month, and the latest lockdown will blow a £1.8 million hole in its budget on top of the £15 million lost last year.
So we expect this lockdown to hurt us to the tune of about £1.8 million. Add that on to £15 million last year, and that leaves a pretty big hole for us. So yeah, it is hurting us financially for sure.
Lockdowns meant the zoo was closed for 18 weeks in 2020, wiping out ticket sales. Adult tickets, including a voluntary contribution at peak times, cost £35, and tickets for children cost £22.75. As Britain's nationwide vaccination effort continues apace, the government has faced increasing calls to start relaxing the stringent lockdown measures. Such a move will be the first step along a long road to stability for places like London Zoo.
Aviation in Nigeria is going strong despite the pandemic. That's because of the level of oversight over the industry. That's coming from an aviation expert with some wealth of experience. He also adds that the sector must not rest on its achievements.
An operator or as a maintenance facility, there are rules. There are approvals that we have. There are limits that we know we can't go beyond. There are things that if we want to do, we must contact NCA before we do them. And once we are done, NCA have to come and check it out. So I can tell you that we have grown to a level now where the Nigerian aviation is safe as far as I'm concerned. And the evidence are there. Today, if you want to fly, you can fly any airline. And all we can just say is that you don't get to a level of comfort when it comes to aviation. What is important is that you must sustain, you must maintain, you must ensure that you don't go to sleep.
The Murtala Mohammed International Airport in Lagos has received the certificate of accreditation from the Airport Council International in its health accreditation program. The Lagos International Airport is the third to be accredited in Nigeria under this program, after the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport and the Port Harcourt International Airport, respectively. This follows efforts by the Federal Airport Authority of Nigeria to ensure the safety and security of all travelers and airport users. The year 2020 may have hit the aviation sector badly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but one area that survived the odds is the cargo subsector, especially the aviation handling companies. Reports saying NACO PLC, Nigeria's oldest handling company, recorded revenue growth in import cargo handling from 3.6 billion naira in 2019 to 3.65 billion naira at the end of 2020. Revenue from its export cargo business rose from 348.6 million naira to about 397.4 million naira in 2020. While its counterpart, SACO PLC, on the other hand, reported import revenue from 4.436 billion naira in 2019 to 4.8 billion naira in 2020. It also grew its cargo handling export revenue from over 318 million naira to about 447.90 million naira in 2020. Now to Mexico, where the country's president, Andrés Manuel Obrador, has opened the first phase of the Mexican capital's new commercial airport at a military base. In his first public event since recovering from COVID-19, Obrador toured facilities at the Santa Lucia military air base north of the sprawling capital, where the controversial airport project being overseen by the military is said to be 50% complete. The plan is a replacement for a part-built $13 billion Mexico City airport on the capital's eastern flank, which Obrador cancelled on October 29, a few weeks before taking the oath of office. According to the government, over 74,000 jobs were created to build the new airport, which is expected to open March 2022. Finally, in Indonesia, where the preliminary report into the plane crash involving a Boeing 737-500, which plunged into the Java Sea minutes after takeoff in January, is creating ripples. The sister of a woman who died in the crash, along with the two young daughters, says no amount of investigation will bring them back. She said the crash has devastated the family, which will never be the same again. Investigators say there was an imbalance in engine thrust that eventually led the aircraft into a sharp roll and then a final dive into the sea. All 62 passengers and crew on board the Air Flight SJ-182 plane died. The crash, which is the third in Indonesia just over 6 years, has highlighted the country's poor air safety record.
Airlines and leasing firms are rushing to permanently convert old passenger jets into freighters, betting on a boom in e-commerce as the value of used planes tumbles amid the pandemic. This is now creating a huge opportunity for passenger-to-freighter conversion companies, including Singapore Technologies Engineering, Israel Aerospace Industries, and US-based aeronautical engineers. Aviation analytics firm Cirium expects the number of passenger-to-freighter conversions globally will rise by 36% to 90 planes in 2021 and to 109 planes in 2022.
Lately, I believe that the cause is the COVID-19, we figured out that the freighters kept the channel of life in the world, and there was increasing in the demand of conversion. Well, most of the economy now in the world is done by e-commerce.
The P2F conversions are a step beyond the cheaper temporary conversions many airlines have implemented during the pandemic, which remove passenger seats to carry more cargo. Permanent conversions are a financial bet that air freight demand, which was weak before COVID-19, will remain strong for years to come as shoppers turn to e-commerce. The airline industry estimates it will take until 2024 for passenger traffic to recover to 2019 levels.
About 50% of air freight is typically carried by passenger aircraft bellies. As a result of COVID, this capacity has reduced substantially overnight because of the grounding of the fleet, especially the international fleet. As a result, in the last few months, we have seen an increased interest in demand for dedicated freighters. A significant amount of inquiries have come in with regards to our Airbus 320, 321, and 330 passenger-to-freighter conversions. We expect the interest for dedicated freighters to continue to be strong in the coming years because of the decrease in capacity offered by passenger aircraft. In addition, in the existing freighter fleet, there are a number of older aircraft types that are being retired, including the A300 and the Boeing 757.
The conversion boom is also helping aviation maintenance, repair and overhaul groups offset some of the lost business from the decline in passenger flights.
Actually, IAI is leading the conversion wide-body market. In the last years, we operate between 5 to 6 lines of conversion, and we supply conversion accordingly. The increase in the demand will increase the number of lines that we are going to operate. And what we are expecting that this demand will keep our booking till the end of 2022.
Boeing said cargo yields had risen by 40% through September because of the pandemic-related passenger disruptions, and it forecasts more than 60% of freighter deliveries over the next 20 years will be conversions rather than new wide-body freighters like the 777.
That's our menu for this week. I'm Bukola Joe Oketumbi. Do stay safe.